The task of perfecting our union moves forward.
Kick it!
We want our children to live in America that isn't burdened by debt, that isn't weakened by inequality,
The Joe Show
that isn't threatened by the destructive power of a warming planet.
on AM 930 Progressive Talk, KBAI.
Well, good Monday. It is Northwest Washington's only local, live, liberal progressive program here on the Progressive Voice of the Pacific Northwest. AM 930 Progressive Talk, KBAI. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you make us a habit, noon to 1 each weekday. And we've been shocked in recent weeks. Well, I mean, it's been a regular event, I guess, and that is the deaths of primarily young black men, sometimes middle-aged black men, at the hands of police officers, oftentimes white police officers. Some very high-profile incidents. And then we have this, what happened in North Charleston, South Carolina, a little over a week ago, when an unarmed black man stopped by a white police officer who the black man ran, and the officer apparently caught up to him. And then as the black man broke away and ran away again, the white officer shot him in the back. That officer fired and now charged with murder. Also in just recent days, Ferguson, Missouri, the voters there elected 2 black representatives to their city council. Have these incidents shocked us enough to where they've kind of beaten us into the realization that we need to make some systemic change here, or we have to have a different attitude about diversity in our communities? And joining me to discuss this, he's been on the program before, and we're happy to have him back once again. Race relations educator, diversity consultant, thought leader, Dr. Derek Greenfield. And thanks for being with us once again, Dr. Greenfield.
My pleasure. I truly appreciate being invited back.
Great. And, these, I guess, a big sigh of relief when we saw that, well, first of all, it's unfortunate that Walter Scott lost his life in this incident, but gratifying that there was a murder charge brought, that this officer was immediately fired from the force. So, but different in the fact that, what we saw in the video was pretty damning.
Sure, and certainly we are glad that justice will hopefully take place in the end. But imagine if the video had not surfaced, and that's one of the things NBC and Meet the Press yesterday showed, kind of a media report, a fictitious one. Had this not happened, the video come to pass, then what would have been the result? Yet another situation in which a black male would have been targeted and killed, and nothing would have happened because it would have been presumed that he was, quote unquote, a threat. Mm-hmm. So hopefully because of this, there'll be more attention. And how many more incidents do you need before people wake up and say there's a pattern here that needs to be addressed? So certainly, again, the biggest loss is the loss of life there. And we've got to find ways, both as in terms of the police officer community, but as a society, because we're gunning each other down spiritually in so many ways by the way in which we treat each other. I came across a study recently that sent off sort of fictitious documents to law firms from across the country and had top legal people from those firms evaluate them. And half the resumes, or half the documents, were named to be a Caucasian Thomas Meyer. The other half were an African-American Thomas Meyer. And then they said, well, evaluate these candidates and tell us how many errors did they make. And literally, it's the same document, but those were the black Thomas Meyer. On average, folks found 14.6 errors. The white Thomas Meyer, 10.2 errors. When they said evaluate on a scale from 0 to 5, the white Thomas Meyer was a 4.1, the black Thomas Meyer was a 3.2. The same document, but who that person was perceived to be dramatically impacted the outcome. And think about it. Nobody would have been there to check up on it afterwards if someone had been hired or not hired. They just would have assumed, hey, we read the documents, here's the truth. We've got to read our own internal documents about how we're perceiving people and do some change both in individual actions, but also in terms of systemic conduct and policy.
Yeah. I've even heard that studies have looked at black-sounding names and applications like you're talking about, and that people who have names that sound like what they would be of the black culture, that they are brushed aside oftentimes in favor of more white-sounding names.
And absolutely, that happens both in MIT and University of Chicago study found 50% more calls for interviews based on the resume. It was the same resume, but as you mentioned, a name that sounded quote-unquote white or sounded quote-unquote black. David Figlio's research years ago found that even children in the same home, when one name is a little bit more quote-unquote different than the other name, more quote-unquote black sounding, that those children actually score lower in standardized tests and score lower in terms of their achievement in school. These are twins. These are children in the same families, and they found just the name bias seemed to trigger something within the teachers that could affect educational outcomes. So again, I think we have to move past the thing of assuming that discrimination is all about individual acts of meanness. Rather, we need to look at sort of this implicit and unconscious bias, but also institutional conduct that allows for certain behaviors to keep going on. Think about the individual in Tulsa, reserve deputy officer, who said he was going for his taser, but ended up shooting and killing another black male a few days ago. It's interesting how you can almost pay your way to get on a police force. He paid a lot of money, gave a lot of equipment, and he's rolling along with a gun. Murder.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, that he basically paid to play cop, and apparently he had been a police officer for a year back in the mid-1960s, and I guess this was his way of reliving his youth to one degree or another. But yeah, is that the kind of person that we should have out armed on the streets policing? It seems to me not.
I would agree. And again, there are plenty of folks who, in their 70s or 80s that can play very vital roles in terms of law enforcement and who have a true and genuine dedication. And nobody's doubting the sincerity and really the desire for so many individuals who risk their lives every single day. And we honor that. But we do need to look at sort of the institutional culture that protects, because indeed, even though folks said they were a little bit concerned about Michael Slager's response and the way in which everything went down in South Carolina, I really don't think much would have happened if that video had not surfaced. Yeah,
I think then that's a fair conclusion to reach. I think look at the debate over and the competing autopsies of Michael Brown and what some experts said and others experts said, it really comes down to he said, with one of the he's being deceased, and nobody else able to really say, with different eyewitness accounts and that sort of thing. And we've seen how in court eyewitnesses can be, their testimony can be completely undermined by even just simple demonstrations and that sort of thing. But I would suspect. Yeah, and I've heard experts say, well, they would have seen that all these wounds, hit the man, from behind. But still, as I said, we had the same kind of debate over the wounds to Michael Brown, and I suspect that we would have had the same competing analyses in this case if we didn't have that video.
Sure. And think about Eric Gardner in New York. I mean, we have video of that. And
yeah.
I'm not sure if anything's really occurred in terms of punitive response to the officers. I mean, he was choked to death. And even the autopsies that we're talking homicide. So we've got to, and think about it, even if, and hopefully we will see justice in the situation with Walter Scott, but even if so, are we really setting such a low bar that actually getting the truth is considered good enough? And that's, well, okay, good. At least we've gotten this one, so really everything is okay now. We wouldn't have had it without that video. And we've got to set a much higher bar that how do we make sure these things do not continue to happen again and really create some new policies and practices. We've got to look at institutional racism. We've got to look at white privilege. We have to look at unconscious bias and really, really look at it and really talk about it. I know that Starbucks tried a nice little campaign with getting people talking. Well, that's cute for Starbucks customers while they're having their 9 a.m. lattes. I'm talking about 9 p.m. We've got to have this country talking. We've got to talk about gender. We have to talk about sexuality. We have to talk about social class, all the things that divide us, and really be willing to say, maybe I don't have all the answers. And maybe there's some things that I think and say, and that's the hard part. I think for so many of us, to be called biased or sexist or racist, homophobic are so painful that we actually don't want to engage, because to recognize that bias or to be called out on our privilege is embarrassing and painful. We need to create safe spaces where we can honestly dialogue and say, look, we all got some stuff to work on. Now let's talk about it. Let's take some action together, because indeed, if one person's holding somebody else down, even though we might say that the oppressed has it worse, the oppressor's stuck right there with them. And so we need to realize that when we're hurting others, we're hurting ourselves and we're being hurt. Let's have some honest dialogue and some action and have some concrete ways for us to get involved in changing the world. Yeah,
and I was going to say that, and you basically said it there, that it is a hard conversation to have, and it's one that we're afraid to have, I think, because as you say, we start to look at our own attitudes and and really consider how we react when we encounter people of other races and that sort of thing, and it makes us uncomfortable. We have to look at the reality of ourselves and our own attitudes toward others.
And we have to also move some paradigms. We have to go beyond thinking that diversity is the answer. It's about inclusion. Diversity is simply counting heads. Inclusion is making sure that all heads count. And that's a very different proposition. We can say in the end, well, gee, as you mentioned in the opening to this piece, Ferguson elected 2 members to its city council, so now it's sort of 50-50 black-white. And that's certainly a wonderful start that numerically we're seeing more representation. But now we need to make sure that they have equal voice and equal power. I mean, the power structures that predated their arrival now in the city council. There's a lot of folks with money and power and influence that can sway the way in which that operates and even kind of change people's attitudes once they get on city council. So we've got to make sure that indeed we're talking about inclusion, not just diversity, that we're different as a start. If somebody is in a wheelchair and I'm up inside the building and there's no ramp for them to get up, I've noticed their difference. That's diversity. But if they can't get in the building, they can't access resources, and we also miss out on what they bring to the table. So inclusion is making sure every voice is heard, that indeed we have full participation, equal opportunity for everybody to have success so that everybody benefits. Michael Sam, before he came out, was an average football player on an average football team. He comes out, team rallies around him. He gets to be his full self. His teammates got to feel like, you know what, if you can be you, I can be me. And then he became an All-American, and the team went number 5 in the nation. So I believe that we have true inclusive excellence. Everybody benefits.
We're talking with Dr. Derek Greenfield. He's a race relations educator, diversity consultant, thought leader, and so much more, and a college professor as well. Quick break, and back with more as we discuss race relations in America and how can we move forward and get beyond where we are today, which is, quite frankly, a very dangerous place for many of our fellow citizens. We'll be back here in just a moment here on The Joe Show, here on AM 930 Progressive Talk. We got some folks on the line, want to join the conversation, and you're welcome as well. 360-734-5697. Back on The Joe Show here on AM 930 Progressive Talk, talking about race relations in light of these ongoing incidents involving police and primarily people of color losing their lives to police, and in light of, as well, what happened in South Carolina a little over a week ago, a white officer gunning down a black man as the man ran away from him, and a charge of murder there. But it's a little, and our guest is Dr. Derek Greenfield, who we've had here on the program to discuss this issue before. And Dr. Greenfield, as we were talking, about this specific incident in South Carolina and how it would have been reported if we didn't have the video, I think it's telling that the initial reports before the video surfaced were that the officer felt threatened, and it was kind of the typical verbiage. And now, since the video has come out, many of the pundits, primarily conservative pundits, who, for instance, stood with the Ferguson police officer who gunned down Michael Brown and defended that officer, and have tried. They're trying to pull this away from being about race. And I saw one comment from a Fox TV News commentator, who said, when I looked at the video and I didn't see race. This was just one man gunning down another man, and they're trying to pull the race issue out of it. And I don't know, how do you feel about that? To me, that doesn't seem productive.
Well, if the pattern persists, we need to look at the common denominator. And if it seems to be, white officers as black individuals who are being killed, then something has to be going on here, whether they think they see it or they don't. It's like telling me if you see somebody, you don't know if they're male or female, you don't sometimes look a second time. You're just trying to figure it out. It may not even be a bad intended thing, but something is happening in the minds. And we know so much research on unconscious bias, so much research in the way in which kind of people process information that shows. I think I might have mentioned last time the research by Philip Goff at UCLA that found that whites, when they're evaluating the age of people who are other whites, they're pretty accurate in age, but undergraduate female students evaluating the results of the age of African-American folks overshoot it by 4.5 years. And so Tamir Rice, who was 12 in Cleveland, when killed, he was called in by the officer who said it was a 20-year-old.
Wow.
You see someone as older, you then see them as less innocent, and more of a threat. And there's that word threat that keeps persisting. So these very, very subtle perceptions that people may not be aware of are triggering some unconscious kinds of reactions. They may say that they're not seeing it, but in their spirit, they're feeling it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's go to the phone, 734-5697. And Ann in Bellingham, hi. You're on the Joe Show with
Hi, Joe.
Dr. Derek Greenfield. Hi.
I really appreciate Dr. Greenfield. For one thing, I liked his inclusion. I think that's what we really need to do in our country is include people, not worry about diversity. There's going to be diversity no matter what because we're all sorts of colors and face and stuff like that. But inclusion is really important. And it is the opposite of patriarchy. So what we're dealing with is not just we're dealing with white male privilege. We're dealing with men that don't even know it. Mm-hmm. You know, they're not aware. They're not that conscious of it, and they become police officers, and they have all this military equipment, and I just think it's appalling that this has gone on for years now, where we've had films of Eric Garner. I mean, that film of him saying, I can't breathe, I can't get that out of my brain. Mm-hmm. You know, and we really need to start, bringing people together. Is Dr. Greenfield, is he from Western or?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's why I hadn't heard him before. Anyway, I'm very impressed with you, Dr. Greenfield, and I've appreciated this show.
Thanks, Ann.
You're welcome.
So
Bye.
you did live in Seattle for a time, Dr. Greenfield.
Yes, I did. I taught at Highline Community College for 8 years. A wonderful, wonderful institution. Get a chance to come back several times a year. But, Ann's comment is so powerful in a number of ways. Let me just mention, the Catalyst organization did a study a few years ago, and they found that Fortune 500 companies, there was a correlation between the number of women they had on their boards and their profits. And so it was very clear that you have more women on a board, they actually made more money. Inclusion is beneficial not only because it's humane and the right thing to do, but it's actually beneficial. Any company knows that when you have diverse ranges of thought represented, people of different backgrounds, indeed they come up with and see things from different ways, that come up with new solutions and creative, innovative ideas. It's good business, it's good practice, it's good ways of living our lives. It's tough to do. That's the challenge, Joe. At first, we like people most like ourselves. The birds of a feather flock together. So most people try to date folks that are like themselves, and I find out at the end, a lot of people end up getting and partner up with people for life that have differences because it balances it out. They get new perspectives and ways of seeing the world. So inclusion, different voices are so powerful, and I appreciate Ann's point about challenging patriarchy. Women's voices that are often interrupted in the world of work, women's voices that are often silenced in so many ways and not believed, need to be included because they raise issues that a lot of men don't want to think about but need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once again, we get back to the whole idea of continuing to discuss this and talk about it honestly, and just looking at, for instance, Ferguson, Missouri, and as I understand in North Charleston, South Carolina, these are majority black communities, but their police forces are majority white, and the Ferguson, Missouri City Council majority white, but getting more of these of the voices of the community into it sounds like whitewashing to use a bad term, but or just cliche that we get people we get people of color involved in these in city government or in policing. But they bring that perspective, and I would think that it would be enlightening for the officers who are not of color.
Absolutely, and we have to go against the tendencies, a concept called homosocial reproduction that says we tend to hire people like ourselves. We tend to have friends with people kind of like ourselves, and our social networks influence who we recommend for jobs and who gets access. So I love the Rooney Rule a number of years ago from the NFL, where they said you have to have at least one person of color on your list of finalists. And you might think that's tokenism, but at least it gets them in the door to interview so they can be seen and heard. And wow, that's a great candidate. Maybe it will be for us, or if not, we can recommend them for somebody else. And so we have to have access points. We have to have entry points for those who've been locked out, and not just assume because we say, that it's open, that people are going to get in the door. I always tell faculty or teachers of any type that it's one thing to say you have office hours. It's another thing to be walking around campus mentoring, engaging students. And then they want to come to your office more because you're being proactive in building relationships. You know, at University of Oklahoma, around the SAE incident, the student group Unheard, the black student group, came to the president. Folks might not know this. They came to the president months before and presented a list of their concerns and demands, and the president refused to meet with them. All of a sudden, it goes national and viral with a video from the bus chant, and now he wants to talk. I think white people sometimes, and men do, and heterosexual folks, groups in power sometimes are afraid to admit of their privilege and sometimes scared to say, I hear you. I believe you. I recognize that pain. Talk to me, and I'm going to actually validate it and value it so we can move forward. I think we have to start from that place that people are not lying for the most part when they tell us about their pain and hurt. And if it's ignored, then it exacerbates the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I would say that the University of Oklahoma president probably, saying, wait, no, there's no problem like this on my campus. I won't. I just, if I were to, accept your request for an audience, then I'm admitting that there's a issue here that needs to be discussed, and I don't want to go there. And like you say, similar to this police shooting, until the video surfaces, then all of a sudden, okay, I agree. We do have a problem here, and it's unfortunate that it is that way. But that's what it is.
And we need to build a narrative now, just not of losses. We've lost so many lives. We've lost so many people who've been hurt. We need to start building a narrative of gains. Let's start talking about and celebrating on your program and others, and you do a wonderful job, but let's talk even more about where are places where good things are happening, where are places where people are indeed taking some risks. I celebrate in Charleston, I think the mayor and others did a wonderful job of really honoring the family and now saying they're going to have body cams, which is at least a start, and make the investment, not only of the financial, but the time commitment to that. So let's begin talking about what's working. Let's talk about the strategies for success. Highlight those. You build much more. It's called social norming. We like to be a part of things that are winners. Just like in the NCAA tournament, folks just jump on the bandwagon. It's time for us to really identify, honor, and lift up those winners and get more people on board to see that we can change. Sometimes we're so afraid, or sometimes we're so convinced that it can't change that we opt out, and we don't have a choice anymore.
Yeah.
You're sitting back saying, you know what, it's not my problem. Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa said, if you think you're being neutral in matters of injustice, you're taking the side of the oppressor, because a mouse with an elephant on its tail does not appreciate your neutrality. Let's get involved and let's take action and celebrate winners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and talking about sports, just made me think that, and I've been a lifelong football fan, and as the phenomenon of black quarterbacks. I mean, it was just accepted that that was a position that a white man needed to fill in professional leagues, especially. But that we didn't have minority quarterbacks for so long. What was Doug Williams in the late '80s was the first black quarterback to win a Super Bowl, and this well more than 2 decades after the Civil Rights Act was passed, and now it's become pretty much the norm. We here in Seattle celebrate have a really highly celebrated and Super Bowl winning quarterback who just happens to be black, and so they break down slowly, but those barriers can be broken down, and we do become more accepting. But we have to keep pushing it, like you say, with the rule that we have to have there have to be so many minority interviews for open coaching positions and that sort of thing.
I thought your example was brilliant, and again, so wonderful that you remember that there was a time, right, when people believed, whether it was sort of overt, or maybe just deep in their consciousness, because it kept happening. All you would see was white quarterbacks, and then it changed. And now, again, that's not even we even talk about, worry about. Of course, there's wonderful quarterbacks of all backgrounds. Well, not all. We still haven't seen the full range. Hopefully with Oregon and Mariota gets in, and we're starting to see that, indeed, these positions can be open for everybody. But that's the kind of change. The late, great Johnny Cochran and some colleagues did a study of coaches. And what he found was that even though black coaches tend to inherit, and this is a critical piece too, they tended to inherit in the NFL teams that were not as good as white coaches inherit. In other words, if a team was struggling, kind of like this country, we said, with President Obama, we're going to give you this really tough hand to deal with. And what they found was that the black coaches actually, in terms of win and loss record, outperformed their white coaches, their counterparts in the first year. even with those challenging circumstances. And so that data showed that, look, there's great things that can happen, but what also happens is too often if a black coach does not do well, they don't get second and third chances as much as white coaches do. And I know we find the same thing, women and lots of other groups when anytime sort of an underrepresented member gets in, if they fail, there's more scrutiny on that person. They're much more noticed. It's kind of like my son, who's black. He's the only black male in his computer science class. And if he misses class, everybody knows who wasn't there.
Uh-huh.
They won't see that if it's a white person. So sometimes that scrutiny can be wonderful to highlight success, but it also can make it a little more challenging if things don't always go very well.
Yeah. I suspect, and I saw the video of the traffic stop there in North Charleston, as most have now, and I suspect that this traffic stop wouldn't even have happened if the driver had been white. And for a broken third tail light or a brake light, it just seems to me that maybe that would be an offense that this officer wouldn't have seen to be a big problem if the driver had been more like him. And this is pure conjecture, but.
And I think, again, wonderful point that indeed it's not saying that, look, although there probably are officers and different individuals who have blatantly racist attitudes, but it's that, again, subtle kind of like little tipper, that's just a tipping of the iceberg that begins to shift attitudes to, should I stop or should I not? We know the Department of Justice study in Ferguson found that black residents, black motorists were stopped twice as often as white motorists. However, they were 28% less likely to have the contraband that they were being stopped supposedly to think they might have had.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have this bias stopping certain people more when they're less likely to actually be guilty of something. And so, we don't know the incidents. We don't know that specific case if he would have been. Your conjecture, I think, certainly is very, very plausible. What we do know is there is a pattern of this in general. And there's something that kind of tips the scale. And this happens in lots of ways. We tend to give people who look like us a little bit more the benefit of the doubt. We tend to give folks that we know better a little bit of a break when we're telling a story. And so we have to think about how all these things coalesce to create certain opportunities for particular groups that are just a little bit more advantageous. I got stopped a number of years ago when I was in North Carolina, and I'll admit it now because it's too late. They can't do anything about it. I in North Carolina about 5 or 6 years without having gotten rid of my Washington driver's license, and I was still driving on it.
Mm-hmm.
I got stopped, got a couple of speeding tickets here and there, and the officer stopped me one day right in front of the college I was teaching at and said, I should put you in jail. In fact, I think you're going to jail. And ironically, I lived in the town of Garner, North Carolina. And, Eric Garner, who couldn't breathe, I literally, at that moment, thought that I couldn't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to breathe. Because of privilege, she let me go. I just have this feeling, had I been a black motorist with a couple of tickets and a license that had been updated in 5 years from the state that they had lived in, I was out of compliance, but I was somehow allowed to keep driving. That's driving while white, which gives you a little bit better benefit than most others would probably get.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to talk to you once again, Dr. Derek Greenfield. And people can find out more about you, your writing, and what you're talking about at derekgreenfield.com.
Absolutely. And those who are into Twitter or Instagram, Professor DG, or on Facebook, Derek, D-E-R-E-K, Greenfield. I love to engage in these conversations. And again, thank you so much for continuing to put the spotlight on these issues. A lot of people put a lot of heat on it, but you shed light.
Well, thanks very much. And you certainly do too. And I'm very grateful to have you on my program today.
Again, my pleasure.
All right, Dr. Derek Greenfield here on the Joe Show. We'll take a quick break.